June 4, 2020, Johannesburg, South Africa. At exactly 10 p.m., surveillance cameras outside an apartment building captured 6 minutes of footage that would become the most crucial evidence in one of the country's most heartbreaking murder cases. A 28-year-old woman, 8 months pregnant, stood on a sidewalk with the father of her unborn child. Within moments, a gray Jeep would pull up. She would hesitate, clearly uncomfortable, before climbing inside. The man who encouraged her to get into that vehicle, the man she trusted because he was her baby's father, would then turn and walk calmly back into his building. He knew she would never return, because he had paid someone 7,000 rand, roughly $4,000, to make sure of it. This is the story of Thandeka Pule and the chilling conspiracy that surveillance cameras caught on tape. To understand what happened on that June evening, it's necessary to go back to where this tragedy began. Thandeka Pule was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. At 28 years old, she had built a life she was proud of, working at MAC Cosmetics while training for a position in their marketing department. Her passion for art and design, first discovered in high school, had transformed into a career that let her creativity shine every single day. She was talented, ambitious, and beloved by everyone who knew her. Friends described her as vibrant and full of life, someone who always had a kind word and a bright smile. In June of 2020, Thandeka was 8 months pregnant and glowing with anticipation. She had learned she was having a girl and had already chosen a name. Despite the complicated circumstances with the baby's father, she was determined to be the best mother possible. She had no idea that the man she had trusted, the man who had gotten her pregnant, had already decided she was a problem that needed to be eliminated. On paper, Ntuthuko Shoba had everything going for him. An IT specialist and stock analyst in his early 30s, he earned roughly 36,000 rand per month, equivalent to about $2,000. In South Africa's struggling economy, that made him wealthy by most standards. He came from money, lived well, and projected the image of a successful young professional building his future. He drove a nice car, dressed well, and maintained an active social life. But beneath that polished surface lived someone far darker, someone who viewed relationships as transactions and women as disposable. Ntuthuko was involved with multiple women simultaneously, keeping each relationship carefully compartmentalized. While dating Thandeka casually throughout 2019, he was simultaneously planning a future with another woman named Rosetta Molo. He described his relationship with Thandeka as nothing serious, just occasional nights out and intimate encounters. Rosetta was the one he claimed to love, the one he had put a deposit down for a wedding with, the one he planned to marry. What made Ntuthuko truly dangerous wasn't just his deception, it was his complete lack of responsibility when consequences arrived. When Thandeka first became pregnant in late 2019, he convinced her to terminate the pregnancy. Both were devastated by the decision, but Ntuthuko quickly moved on, securing that wedding deposit with Rosetta, while continuing to see Thandeka behind his fiancé's back. Then came the second pregnancy in early 2020. This time, Thandeka waited months before telling him, perhaps knowing how he would react. When she finally informed him in February, she made it clear she would not make that choice again. Her text message laid bare her desperation and vulnerability. She wrote that they had a situation that needed to be dealt with, that she needed his support, that time was not on their side because she wanted to start going for checkups, that she was in a fragile state. Ntuthuko's response revealed his true character. He never showed up for doctor's appointments despite promising he would. He sent money only after months of pressure and requests. He refused to tell his family or Rosetta about the baby, and as Thandeka's belly grew with each passing month, so did his resentment toward her and the situation. In one particularly cold message, he wrote to her that she was getting herself frustrated because she was forcing herself to be there, that it wasn't natural. The subtext was clear. He wanted nothing to do with this pregnancy or this child. By May of 2020, the situation had deteriorated completely. Thandeka started receiving threatening messages from an unknown number, messages that authorities later believed came from Rosetta. One message read that the sender was coming to her workplace, woman to woman. Another asked how she felt sleeping with another woman's man. Thandeka, never one to back down, fired back with her own messages, suggesting that if the harassment continued, the other woman would end up in a mental institution, and asking how happy she would be with this so-called man once that happened. The messages escalated further. Rosetta accused Thandeka of being promiscuous, suggesting the baby might not even be Ntuthuko's. She even claimed Thandeka had a serious illness and should get tested, a cruel lie meant to terrorize a pregnant woman. But the real terror was happening behind the scenes, in conversations Thandeka knew nothing about. Between May 29th and June 4th, 2020, Ntuthuko made approximately 20 phone calls to an old high school friend named Ntuthuko Shoba. They weren't catching up on old times or discussing sports or work. They were planning murder. The plan was chillingly simple and methodical. Ntuthuko would lure Thandeka to his apartment under the pretense of buying baby clothes together and having a mature conversation about their future and the baby. After spending some time together, perhaps having dinner, he would call for a ride to take her home safely. But the ride would actually be Ntuthuko driving his girlfriend's gray Jeep. Once Thandeka was in the vehicle, Ntuthuko would drive her to a remote location and kill her. For this service, for taking the life of a pregnant woman and her unborn child, Ntuthuko promised to pay 70,000 rand, roughly $4,000. According to Ntuthuko's later confession to police, this wasn't even their first attempt. They had allegedly tried to abduct Thandeka from a McDonald's restaurant several days earlier, but something had gone wrong with that plan. Now they had refined their approach, one that depended entirely on Thandeka trusting the father of her child. On the evening of June 4th, 2020, Thandeka took a taxi to Ntuthuko's apartment complex in Johannesburg. Surveillance footage captured her arrival at the building. She was 8 months pregnant, wearing casual, comfortable clothes, completely unaware of what awaited her. Inside the apartment, they spent several hours together. Whether they actually discussed the baby, whether he showed her any baby clothes, whether they had the dinner he had promised, remains unknown. What investigators do know is that later that evening, Thandeka called her Aunt Priscilla, the woman who had raised her after both of her parents died. She told Priscilla that she was at Ntuthuko's place, that they had been arguing most of the day, but that she would be heading home soon. That phone call would be the last time Priscilla heard her niece's voice. At exactly 10 p.m., surveillance cameras outside Ntuthuko's apartment building captured what would become the most crucial evidence in the entire case. The footage is grainy, but clear enough to see exactly what happened in those final 6 minutes of Thandeka's freedom. The video shows Ntuthuko and Thandeka walking out of the apartment complex together. They disappear briefly from the camera's view, then re-emerge at 10:06 p.m. They are standing by the roadside, apparently waiting for something. Within moments, a gray Jeep pulls up and stops near them. This is where the footage becomes truly heartbreaking to watch. You can see Thandeka's hesitation clearly in her body language. She approaches the passenger door slowly, obviously uncomfortable with the situation. The driver, who would later admit he had been drinking, appears unsteady. But Ntuthuko is there right beside her, encouraging her, reassuring her. He is the father of her child, the man she has known for over a year, the man she wants to believe cares about her and their baby. Thandeka opens the door and climbs into the vehicle. The Jeep drives away into the night, and the man who just condemned the mother of his child to death turns and walks calmly back into his building. He shows no hesitation, no concern, no emotion whatsoever. He simply walks back inside as if nothing significant has just happened. Eerily, approximately 3 minutes of surveillance footage are missing from this timeline, with the video jumping from 10:06 to 10:09 p.m. The building owner later claimed the cameras only activated with sufficient movement detected near the fence, which would explain the gap. But what happened in those missing minutes? Investigators believe that during that time, Ntuthuko, Thandeka, and Ntuthuko spent those moments together, with Ntuthuko giving final instructions before sealing Thandeka's fate. The surveillance footage was damning enough without those missing minutes, but their absence would later raise questions during the trial. Ntuthuko would later confess to police about every harrowing detail of what happened after Thandeka got into that gray Jeep. He drove her to a remote area in the veld, the expansive grasslands outside Johannesburg. These areas are often used as illegal dumping sites, places where people discard trash and unwanted items, far from the eyes of law enforcement or witnesses. It was the perfect location for what Ntuthuko had paid him to do. According to his confession, Ntuthuko led Thandeka out of the vehicle. She was 8 months pregnant, vulnerable, and completely at his mercy in this isolated location. What happened next was brutal and deliberate. The autopsy would later reveal disturbing details that made the crime even more horrific. The injuries inflicted did not cause immediate death. Thandeka was still alive, still conscious, when Muzikais loaded her back into the vehicle and drove to another secluded area near Rudaport. There, in an attempt to stage the scene to look like something other than what it was, he placed her body in a way that would be discovered days later. Thandeka Pule died alone in the darkness of the South African veld. Her unborn daughter, at 31 weeks of development and viable for survival if delivered immediately, was lost with her. There was no one there to save either of them, no one to hear any cries for help, no witnesses to intervene. For 3 agonizing days, Thandeka's family searched desperately for answers. When she didn't come home on the night of June 4th, Priscilla immediately knew something was terribly wrong and called the police to report her missing. Friends and relatives flooded social media with missing person posts, sharing Thandeka's photo and begging anyone with information to come forward. Every hour without word increased their panic and fear. On the morning of June 8, 2020, 4 days after Thandeka had gotten into that gray Jeep, a maintenance worker clearing litter and debris from the veld made a discovery that would haunt him forever. While removing trash from the grassland area, he noticed something unusual in the vegetation above him. When he looked up to investigate, he found himself staring at the body of a heavily pregnant woman, showing clear signs of violence. Horrified and shaken, the worker immediately ran back toward the nearest road and alerted authorities. Police arrived quickly and secured the scene. They confirmed what everyone had feared. The victim was Thandeka Pule. She had been attacked and killed. Her unborn baby girl was gone. The scene and the condition of the body made it immediately clear to investigators that this was no random crime, no robbery gone wrong, no chance encounter with a dangerous stranger. This was calculated, deliberate, and personal. Someone had planned this carefully. Thandeka's family knew immediately where to direct investigators. They had been fully aware of her tumultuous relationship with Ntuthuko Shoba, his refusal to acknowledge the pregnancy publicly, his engagement to another woman, and the escalating hostility between them in recent months. They told police everything they knew about the relationship, about Ntuthuko's behavior, about the threatening messages Thandeka had received. Detectives brought Ntuthuko in for questioning within hours of identifying Thandeka's body. During the interview, he was calm and unhelpful, offering almost no useful information about Thandeka's last known movements or who might have wanted to harm her. He claimed he barely knew her, that they were casual acquaintances at best, that he had no idea what could have happened to her. But investigators had already discovered something he couldn't explain away or lie about. The surveillance cameras at his apartment building had captured everything. When detectives reviewed the security footage from June 4th, they found the last known images of Thandeka alive. The video clearly showed Ntuthuko and Thandeka leaving his apartment together at 10 p.m. It captured them standing together by the roadside, apparently waiting. It recorded a gray Jeep pulling up beside them. And most damning of all, it showed Thandeka getting into that vehicle while Ntuthuko stood there watching, then calmly walking back to his building alone after she drove away. The missing 3 minutes of footage raised some questions, but what remained was devastating enough to establish a clear timeline. Investigators now had a specific lead to pursue. They needed to identify the gray Jeep and its driver, and they needed to find out why Ntuthuko had put Thandeka into a vehicle and then returned to his apartment without her. Within days of reviewing the surveillance footage, police successfully tracked down the vehicle. It belonged to a young woman who had a solid alibi for June 4th and was quickly cleared of any involvement. But her boyfriend, Muzikais Malafane, did not have an alibi. Detectives discovered that Muzikais was in his 20s and had attended the same high school as Ntuthuko years earlier. They had known each other for over a decade. The connection was too significant to ignore, too coincidental to dismiss. On June 15th, just 11 days after Thandeka's murder, police arrested Muzikais Malafane and brought him in for interrogation. Under questioning, the young man folded almost immediately. He confessed to everything, providing details about the crime and pinning the entire conspiracy squarely on Ntuthuko Shoba. According to Muzikais' initial statement, he was merely the driver, someone hired to dispose of a problem. Ntuthuko, he claimed, was the mastermind behind the entire plot, the person who had planned everything and paid for the execution. But there was a significant legal problem. Without physical evidence directly tying Ntuthuko to the crime scene or the murder weapon, without financial records showing a payment, prosecutors didn't have enough to charge him yet. They needed more concrete evidence to build a case that would hold up in court. So Ntuthuko walked free while Muzikayisi sat in jail, and investigators continued working to build an airtight case against the man they believed was truly responsible. The breakthrough came in January of 2021, several months after the murder, when Muzikayisi changed his story and pleaded guilty to the crime. This time, he provided full, detailed testimony about the conspiracy. Ntuthuko, he told investigators, had hired him to kill Thandeka for 70,000 rand, approximately $4,000. They had communicated extensively using a burner phone to avoid detection by police or anyone tracking their regular phone numbers. Muzikayisi explained how Ntuthuko had carefully planned every detail of the crime, how they had attempted it once before at a McDonald's, and how the final successful attempt had unfolded exactly as Ntuthuko had orchestrated it. Investigators moved quickly to verify Muzikayisi's new account. They obtained cell tower data for the weeks leading up to Thandeka's death. The data revealed something damning. In the days before June 4th, both Ntuthuko's regular personal phone and an unregistered burner phone pinged off the same cell towers at the same times, more than a dozen instances of the two phones being in identical locations simultaneously. The burner phone had also been in frequent contact with Muzikayisi's phone number during this same period. When confronted with this evidence, Ntuthuko offered an explanation that investigators found absurd. He claimed the burner phone was for buying cigarettes in illegal bulk quantities during South Africa's COVID-19 restrictions, which had temporarily banned tobacco sales. But detectives found zero evidence of any such transactions. No contacts with cigarette sellers, no messages about tobacco purchases, nothing. The phone's only apparent purpose had been communicating with Muzikayisi about the plot to kill Thandeka. Armed with this new evidence, the cell tower data, Muzikayisi's detailed confession, and the surveillance footage, prosecutors finally arrested Ntuthuko Shoba in February of 2021, 8 months after Thandeka's death. He immediately proclaimed his complete innocence, a stance he would maintain throughout the entire legal process. His defense team began preparing for trial, knowing they faced an uphill battle against the mounting evidence. Ntuthuko Shoba's trial began in July of 2022, more than 2 years after he had orchestrated Thandeka's murder. The prosecution presented what they described as a circumstantial but overwhelming case built on three main pillars of evidence: the surveillance footage from his apartment building, the cell phone tower data, and Muzikayisi Malafene's detailed testimony about the conspiracy. The surveillance video was particularly damning when played in court. Prosecutors could point to Ntuthuko using what appeared to be the burner phone to coordinate with Muzikayisi. They could show his body language as he encouraged a clearly hesitant Thandeka to get into the vehicle, and they could demonstrate to the jury how he walked away without any apparent care or concern after she drove off to her death. The cell tower evidence systematically destroyed Ntuthuko's cigarette-buying excuse. Prosecutors asked the obvious questions. Why would someone need a secret phone active only when communicating with one specific person to buy cigarettes? Why would that burner phone consistently be in the exact same locations as his personal phone? Why were there no messages or contacts related to tobacco purchases, if that was truly the phone's purpose? The evidence suggested only one explanation. The phone was used specifically to communicate with Muzikayisi about the murder plot without creating a trail on Ntuthuko's regular phone. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Muzikayisi himself. He described in detail the 20 phone calls between May 29th and June 4th where they planned the murder. He explained the alleged failed attempt to abduct Thandeka from McDonald's days earlier. He outlined the detailed plan to lure Thandeka with promises of baby clothes and mature conversation about their future. He described the agreement to stage a pickup that would look innocent on camera, and he confirmed the 70,000 rand payment that Ntuthuko had promised for carrying out the killing. Prosecutors argued that Ntuthuko's motive was crystal clear and compelling. Thandeka's pregnancy threatened his upcoming marriage to Rosetta and his carefully constructed image of success and respectability. He had already convinced Thandeka to terminate one pregnancy the previous year. When she refused to terminate the second pregnancy, when she made it clear she was having this baby regardless of his wishes, he decided she was a problem that had only one solution. After all, Thandeka herself had texted him months earlier, apologizing for ruining his plans for his life. That message showed she understood exactly how he viewed her pregnancy, as an inconvenience, as an obstacle to his perfect future. The defense had virtually nothing to work with. Ntuthuko maintained he was innocent, that he knew nothing about what happened to Thandeka after she left his apartment, that the surveillance footage simply showed him calling a ride for her as a courtesy. But his lawyers couldn't explain the burner phone in any credible way. They couldn't explain why their client had lied repeatedly about telling his family about the baby. They couldn't explain his complete lack of concern or attempts to help when Thandeka disappeared. And they couldn't overcome the combined weight of the surveillance footage, the phone records, and Muzikayisi's testimony. Jury deliberation took less than a full day. The judge found Ntuthuko Shoba guilty of premeditated murder and defeating the ends of justice. When it came time for sentencing, the judge was direct and unequivocal in his remarks. He sentenced Ntuthuko to life in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 25 years. The judge made clear that Ntuthuko received a harsher sentence than Muzikayisi, not because he had maintained his innocence during trial, but because he was the prime mover in the crime, the person who conceived the plan and set everything in motion. The judge stated that the facts of the case strongly suggested that Ntuthuko Shoba would have found a way to kill Thandeka Pule with or without Muzikayisi Malafene's help, that he was determined to eliminate what he saw as a problem threatening his future. Muzikayisi, in exchange for his cooperation and guilty plea, received 20 years in prison. Some observers argued that sentence was too lenient for the person who actually killed a pregnant woman. But South African law provides for reduced sentences when defendants assist in prosecuting their co-conspirators. And Muzikayisi's testimony had been crucial to convicting Ntuthuko. Thandeka Pule's murder sparked outrage across South Africa, but sadly did not surprise those familiar with the country's gender-based violence epidemic. She joined a horrifically long list of women killed by intimate partners in a country facing a crisis that shows no signs of slowing. The statistics are staggering and paint a grim picture. In South Africa, a woman is murdered every 4 hours. More than 50% of those cases involve intimate partners or ex-partners. That rate is 5 times higher than the global average, making South Africa one of the most dangerous places in the world for women. Thandeka is one of countless South African women whose stories have been covered by true crime channels, whose names have become hashtags, whose deaths sparked temporary outrage before the news cycle moved on. Every new case triggers the same predictable cycle: public mourning, social media outrage, protests demanding systemic change, and then nothing actually changes. The violence continues. More women die, more families grieve, more hashtags trend briefly before being forgotten. The surveillance footage in this case doesn't lie. Those 6 minutes of video captured Thandeka's final moments of freedom, her visible hesitation and discomfort, her misplaced trust in the father of her child, and Ntuthuko's calculated betrayal. The footage caught the entire conspiracy on camera: the coordination between Ntuthuko and Muzikayisi, the execution of their plan, the cold-blooded aftermath. Without that surveillance video, Ntuthuko Shoba might very well have gotten away with murder. The case serves as a powerful reminder of how crucial physical evidence has become in modern criminal investigations. Digital forensics, cell tower location data, and security cameras increasingly solve crimes that might once have remained unsolved mysteries. Ntuthuko thought he was being clever by using a burner phone to coordinate the murder, but he wasn't clever enough to keep that phone physically separate from his regular phone. That critical mistake, captured in the cell tower data, cost him his freedom and his future. Thandeka Pule was 28 years old when she died. She was 8 months pregnant with a daughter she had already named and dreamed about raising. She was talented, ambitious, kind, creative, and deeply loved by her family and friends. Her younger sister, whom she had supported through severe depression, now lives with the unbearable knowledge that she couldn't save her protector. Her Aunt Priscilla, who had raised Thandeka after both her parents died, now carries the weight of that final phone call where Thandeka said she was heading home soon. She never made it home. She never got to hold her baby daughter. She never got to build the life she had planned. All of that was taken from her by a man who valued his reputation and his wedding plans more than 2 human lives. 10 years from now, Ntuthuko Shoba will still be in prison. 25 years from now, when he first becomes eligible for parole, Thandeka's daughter would have been 25 years old, possibly starting her own family. But that little girl never got the chance to take her first breath, to say her first word, to take her first step. She died with her mother in that veld, two victims of one man's monstrous selfishness. The surveillance cameras captured the truth that Ntuthuko tried to hide. The evidence exposed his lies. The justice system held him accountable. But none of that brings Thandeka back. None of that gives her daughter the life she deserved. Justice was served in the courtroom, but the real injustice can never be undone. If this case made you think about the epidemic of violence against women and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable, hit that subscribe button for Classified Crimes. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We examine evidence, we respect victims, and we demand justice. The surveillance footage told the truth when the killer tried to lie, and the truth, no matter how dark, always deserves to be heard.